Brandon Nimmo was a pretty strong potential fit for the San Francisco Giants, and he's the latest player to come off the board that is really thinned out here. So who's left for the Giants, and is it time to start thinking about the trade market next?
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And yes, coming up on today's show, the market has thinned out again, with Brandon Nimmo agreeing to another deal that exceeded expectations here in the same kind of way that a lot of these deals have exceeded expectations. Essentially a lower average annual value, but many more years than expected. Like, people did not expect Trey Turner to get 11 years, Xander Bogaerts to get 11 years, and now Nimmo gets 8 years and $162 million to return to the New York Mets. And so prior to the winter meetings, which got underway essentially on Monday, there was very little activity in the free agent market, and there was almost all of the players who were the top players remaining available to sign. But that has changed in a major way, as now Aaron Judge, Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, Jacob deGrom, Brandon Nimmo, Wilson Contreras, Justin Verlander, Jose Abreu, and on have signed. And so it is beginning to be Correa or bust for the Giants. It is definitely Correa or bust if the plan is to make a major addition on the free agent market. There is still Dansby Swanson. There is still Carlos Rodon in addition to Correa, but those are the only three guys predicted to get contracts north of $100 million. There's Kodai Senga. The prediction there is around 5 years, $70 million. But the way this market has gone, a lot of guys are getting more than we expected. And so for Correa, the prediction was like close to $300 million. And at this point, I think it's going to take significantly more than $300 million. And then we've got, report today, a podcast or radio hit with Buster Olney of ESPN, and he's saying that he understands the Giants are not that far along with Carlos Correa, and he speculates that the Yankees may be a team that gets in the mix with Carlos Correa. And I do believe that Correa grew up a Yankees fan. I could be wrong about that, but I know he idolized Derek Jeter, also Alex Rodriguez, like tall shortstops and Yankees shortstops, frankly. The reason we did an episode yesterday talking about the suitors for Correa and that it put the Giants in a good position, but I was not counting the Yankees because they have a shortstop. I get it. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is not the kind of guy you don't get Carlos Correa because you have him on your roster, but they have IKF in addition to a couple of their best prospects are shortstops. And so it didn't seem like the most logical fit, and it still might not be. But they could be thinking about, Correa going there until the young guys come up, and then you kind of mix them in and see if they're any good. Or they could be thinking about Correa as a third baseman. And, Josh Donaldson is on that roster, but I think it's only one more year of Donaldson, and Donaldson did not have a good year for them. So if the Yankees get involved and I talked about how the Giants have the potential to bully a team like the Twins financially. There's not that many teams that I'm going to say. I mean, there's plenty, but when we're talking about a premium free agent, you don't often think of the Giants as being that team that could bully their way to making a signing. But if the Yankees get involved, then the Giants can always be bullied by the Yankees. And that's kind of what we saw with Aaron Judge. Although I'm going to be saying this for a decade. The Yankees essentially, from what we understand, matched the Giants' offer. That's what it took for the Yankees to get him, was to match the better offer that the Giants were making. And I'm going to keep saying this too. If you heard that the Padres offered $400 million, that is false. We have reputable reports that they did not offer $400 million. We're hearing they maybe were going to, but they didn't. And so possibly going to isn't the same as actually offering it. So the Giants had the best offer on Judge, and the Yankees matched it, and then that was what it took. So the question is, do they go get Carlos Correa? And the answer is, I don't know. And there's definitely a possibility that they don't end up with him. And what is going to happen if they don't end up with him? Well, it's hard for them to make impact additions in free agency if they don't sign Carlos Correa at this point. I think Swanson is a good player. I've said over and over, he's the worst of the four shortstops in my opinion. He had one of the better 2022 seasons. He's athletic, he's fast. And I've said repeatedly, like any of those four guys, Correa, Turner, Bogaerts, Swanson, would make the Giants a significantly better team. And so there's no doubt that Swanson is a good player who I would accept if that ended up being someone they signed as a good signing. I mean, it depends on the money. At this point, if you're giving Dansby Swanson $240 million, I'm not so sure that would be a great signing. But the predicted contract is more like $150 million over 6 years. But at this point, again, I think he's getting more than that in the form of a few more years. And then there's Carlos Rodon. But if you bring in, even if you re-sign Rodon, you're kind of just parallel to where you were last year. Yes, you've brought in Mitch Haniger. Yes, you hopefully can have some better performance from some guys. Yes, there's young players who are a year closer to the majors, and you're probably going to see the likes of Kyle Harrison and perhaps Casey Schmidt make an impact on the Giants in 2023. But at this point, it's basically Correa or bust on the free agent market in order to make that real splash. And then it may be time to turn our attention and really realistically start thinking about the trade market. And there are guys, like I had this conversation on Twitter last night. I think that there's some misperceptions about the Giants farm system, people thinking it's bad or that they don't have the pieces to make major trades. And I think that that's wrong. And so coming up in just a minute, we're going to name some of the guys who are out there on the trade market, because really it's time to start thinking about that as an alternative if they really miss out on all of their top targets in free agency. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But before we do, we're going to pause the podcast for a second because I have to tell you that Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on earth, and they've got new flavors, and I'm in love with these flavors. Whether it's white chocolate, peppermint granola, it's Built's take on the granola bar, and it's more filling, just insanely tasty. This is near and dear to my heart. Candy cane brownie puffs. Built Puffs are like biting into the world's most delicious cloud, fluffy, marshmallowy. And what's amazing about Built Bar is that they managed to achieve this unbelievable flavor with a healthy profile, and you're getting 17 grams of protein in a typical bar and shockingly low sugar and just 130 calories. As soon as you sink your teeth into a Built Bar, you're going to know what I'm talking about. So go to built.com, and you can get 15% off your order right now by using code LOCKEDON15. That's built.com, promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your order. All right, as promised, we are going to discuss some trade possibilities because that's the thing. I don't want to set up expectations like Carlos Correa is a slam dunk to go to the Giants. I think that, like, when all is said and done, the Giants are just getting rejected by some of these guys. Like, it's not that they lowballed anybody here for Aaron Judge, right? And we don't know how much they were in on Nimmo. We haven't heard reports on that. But 8 years for Brandon Nimmo, with a guy with serious durability concerns throughout his whole career. Look, I like the player quite a bit, and it's a very modest, like $20.25 million a year for Brandon Nimmo. But it's hard to say, okay, yeah, you're going to offer 9 years and best the Met. Like, that's just kind of insane. And a lot of like Xander Bogaerts getting 11 years. It's a very interesting shift in the way these contracts are getting structured, and that teams are kind of willing to pay for those old, close to age 40 seasons in exchange for kind of getting a modest, relatively low average annual value over the duration of the contract. So that's not really historically what the Giants have preferred. They've kind of wanted seemingly the opposite, which is shorter term, higher average annual value. But the problem is you can't necessarily get there in terms of matching the money for a long-term deal. Like if you wanted to say, okay, I'm going to offer Correa $40 million a year over 6 years, that comes out to just $240 million. Whereas if you say, we'll offer him $28 million a year over 12 years, it's $336 million. And so he's going to prefer getting paid less per year, but more total money. You might think, well, he has a chance to re-enter the market if you give him the shorter term deal and he can make up for it. But the problem is he would re-enter the market at an old age when he wouldn't necessarily get a good contract. So you don't want to hit free agency at age like 34 or 35. You want to hit it right when he is hitting it at 28 and cash in on just the biggest total guarantee you can get. And so that's what's happening here. And so for Correa, I think it's going to take, look, you could go like $50 million a year over 3 years or 4 years, and maybe with opt-outs, which is kind of close to what he did with the Twins, but it's much more even per year than what the Twins did. And perhaps that's appealing to him. But if you're trying to do that, is San Francisco really a great place to do that? Because it's not a good place for offense, and it's cold and it's windy. And I know I'm sounding like a wet blanket here, but it's just the reality. Like a lot of these other places get warm and humid in a good way for hitter, conducive to like baseball. San Francisco's kind of unique in that it's cold and it's windy and there's the marine layer, and it's just not necessarily the great place to hit. But I don't know. It just depends. Like what speaks to Carlos Correa, who is the competition, and what are they willing to offer, and what are the Giants willing to offer? But my point is they could miss out, and it's a very real possibility. And then there's not a lot of guys left. And so, yes, we discussed some of the trade possibilities on Twitter last night, and I just want to get into what they are in terms of the center field market, because Brandon Nimmo signed, right, with the Mets, and the Giants and Farhan Zaidi has been pretty clear that one of the pieces that would fit them the best is a good defensive center fielder. And there's Kevin Kiermaier. He's not a trade candidate. He's a free agent. And I think that he does actually make sense. I think there's a misperception that he's like terrible offensively. He's more mediocre than terrible offensively. He's not Steven Duggar. He's like what everyone dreamed Steven Duggar would be. He's elite defensively, elite on the bases, elite arm. The problem has been durability. He did have hip surgery. He's also missed a lot of time throughout his career. But, it wouldn't be a huge contract at all that he would get. And he is a good player when he's healthy. But the problem has been health, and that's something I don't know that the Giants can afford to deal with, is another player who's missing a lot of time every year. But if he's part of a timeshare plan, I think it could make sense, especially now that the market has been depleted. But turning to the trade possibilities, the Diamondbacks are probably going to trade, or at least it's very possible they could trade one of their good outfielders. And I've gotten the question, why would they trade these guys? It's because they have too many guys. They've got Corbin Carroll, who's like the top prospect in baseball and was really impressive when he debuted with them in 2022, and figures to just be a huge part of their future starting now. So Corbin Carroll, get used to the name. He could be a star for Arizona. They've also got Daulton Varsho, who's just become one of the better young players in the game. He's entrenched in that outfield mix. They've got Alek Thomas, who was very recently a top prospect in his own right, although he struggled a little bit in the major leagues in a tiny little sample of major league experience, but he's on that roster. And they've got Jake McCarthy, who just tortured the Giants in 2022 with his speed and athleticism, and he could be available in a trade. And they traded for Kyle Lewis from the Seattle Mariners, and they also have Pavin Smith. So they've just got so many talented young outfielders that I think realistically Alek Thomas and Jake McCarthy are the guys who could be fits for the Giants that wouldn't cost them necessarily like as much as a Daulton Varsho, and I just think there's no chance they trade Corbin Carroll. And the other guys, Pavin Smith and Kyle Lewis, I think aren't necessarily worth giving up too much for. So it would be Alek Thomas and Jake McCarthy. Make a lot of sense. And then there's been trade speculation about Dylan Carlson from the St. Louis Cardinals. Carlson is local to the Bay Area. Forgetting exactly, Elk Grove. Does that ring a bell? He's from the area, and the Giants have liked these guys, and he was a top prospect himself. Quality player, switch hitter, good arm, good speed, good defense, and offensive upside. He's kind of maybe not got a super high ceiling, but a pretty high floor, and is just an athletic, young, switch hitting, like center field type, and super attractive to me. And then you've got guys like Ramón Laureano on the Oakland A's, who's definitely available, who I think the reputation defensively for Laureano is much better than what kind of the numbers have shown. He's got a positive PED suspension recently. He just came back in 2022 from a suspension. And I don't know, he's kind of, to me, I'm not even sure he's a center fielder, but great arm, probably available, maybe with some better athleticism. I don't know. I haven't watched a ton of him over the last little while, but what I have seen, he doesn't, I think that the reputation is maybe a little better than the actual performance, and he's got 3 years of team control through the arbitration process. So all of those guys I just mentioned are under club control for multiple seasons and are relatively young and are athletic and would help the Giants. And so it's not just free agency, although if they really did miss on like everybody, it would be a major disappointment and failure in a sense, but it wouldn't be for lack of trying, as far as I understand. Certainly Aaron Judge, like I said, they made the offer that the Yankees had to match in order to get him. So the Giants, speaking of trades, have already made a trade, and that trade was that there was the Rule 5 draft. The Reds took a player from the Pirates, and the Giants immediately turned around and traded for him themselves. So we're going to get into who the Giants acquired in this trade and what does he bring to the table and why he could be a legitimate factor in 2023 on the Major League roster. We'll get to it in just a second, but before we do, all right, as promised, we are going to get into this trade that kind of went under the radar because it happened on the same day that Aaron Judge ended up signing with the New York Yankees, but the Giants went out and they acquired Blake Sabol from the Cincinnati Reds. The Reds had just taken him with the 4th pick in the Rule 5 draft. Giants didn't take anybody, but they effectively took Sabol because they traded for him. So really interesting in the sense that he's a catcher, but he's a catcher who can also play the outfield. And there's, of course, the standard jokes that Farhan Zaidi, Giants front office, just all they want to do is target catchers. But I will continue to say, like, they clearly, you can disagree with my opinion if you want, when I say that I don't think that they're super comfortable with Joey Bart just being handed the reins to continue to be their catcher. I think that it's a position where they could afford to make an upgrade. And again, don't take my opinion for it. It's pretty clear that that's what they're doing, is scouring the market. We've got Susan Slusser reporting even prior to 2022, but also now reporting that the Giants have contacted the Oakland A's about Sean Murphy, who would immediately be a significant upgrade for the Giants at that position. There's also the Toronto Blue Jays trio of catchers who, they've got 3 good catchers and they're probably going to trade one of them. And so the Giants could be a good fit there, potentially, if they're looking to upgrade at catcher. But it's interesting that they go out of their way to trade cash and a player to be named later. So obviously we don't know who the player is for Blake Sabol. But what's so interesting in particular, first of all, he's a left-handed hitter, which is not super common with catchers and something they value. But what's so interesting is that these Rule 5 picks, even if you trade for them, that's how they got Connor Joe, by the way. He was a Rule 5 pick, I think also by the Reds. And the Giants traded for him. And that's why he was on the opening day roster. And with Sabol, look, it's early in the offseason. I would not be surprised at all if he does not last all offseason on the roster. But with the Rule 5 picks, they have to be in the major leagues with the team that has them. Otherwise, you have to offer them back to the team that they came from in the Rule 5 draft. So that would be the Pittsburgh Pirates. And so what this means is that they're currently projecting Sabol to be part of their Major League 26-man roster. And so Farhan Zaidi had some stuff to say about Sabol when they were, when he met with the media when they were in the winter meetings in San Diego. He said, quote, "We just see him as a guy who could be a backup catcher, who could be a third catcher because of his ability to do other things. We really like the offensive profile. As a catcher, his framing is actually pretty solid, a little bit above average. We have bullpen coach Craig Albernaz look at any potential catching acquisitions, and he thinks there's a pretty solid defensive level now, and there's room for improvement." He continues, quote, "He's a good athlete, and he's had 2 good offensive seasons moving through the upper levels. Whether it's a number 2 or a number 3 catcher who is doing other things, he'll be an interesting guy to try to fit." So yes, like the reason I mentioned Joey Bart is because this guy has to be in the major leagues if they have him on the roster. They've already got Austin Wynns, who low key was pretty darn solid for the Giants. And so Giants potentially have their own trade candidate themselves in Joey Bart. I think there are teams that would take a shot on a Joey Bart. And I don't know. I mean, they've got Ford Proctor, who's also a catcher in the mix. They've got Austin Wynns, and now they've got Blake Sabol. And it'll be interesting to see what they do. No, it's not a headliner acquisition, but it is interesting. And he really did hit in the upper minors. I mean, dude hit, just really good season in 2022 in AA and AAA with the Pirates. Hit 19 homers, stole 10 bases, good on base percentages, good power. And the projection, according to Steamer, is to be an above average offensive player. And so fascinating to see what happens. No, it's not Carlos Correa, and I understand not really caring about these types of acquisitions, but it is interesting nonetheless. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again on Monday. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.